This week is, according to this article, the biggest Supreme Court case in a long time. The quiet blockbuster ahead for the Supreme Court. I woke up and it was so swollen that I just decided to sit back here. I've turned the lights down a little bit. I'm just hiding from you all in plain sight. Welcome to Doug in Exile as we go into this week's biggest Supreme Court decision yet. Here's Robert's rules. Next week, the Supreme Court will hold its biggest oral argument of the year so far. It will consider whether to maintain a series of nationwide injunctions that have prevented the administration from enforcing President Donald Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship. So what you guys may not know is every time Trump orders illegals to leave the country, they might even be criminal illegals. If they have a pregnant woman here, that baby is considered open to being a birthright citizen child born here in America. And so that goes back to the Constitution saying if you're born here, you're a citizen. So an illegal, even a criminal illegal, who's saying you can't deport me, I'm the father of this kid, this is my wife and she's pregnant, or this is my girlfriend and she's pregnant, and that baby is a citizen. That's what's going up to the Supreme Court. Is before Trump does all these deportations, they want to have the Supreme Court weigh in. John Roberts is going to argue in this article that he's not allowed to even look at the repercussions of what their decisions make on the Supreme Court. They just have to kind of put their blinders on and look clearly at the Constitution and tell you what it says, regardless of outcome. So there's two outcomes from both sides, Democrats and Republicans, where we're trying to get Roberts to look at the outcome, look at the outcome. And Roberts goes, no, our job is just to look at the text. That's what it means to be a textualist, a constitutionalist, which was really started by Antonin Scalia.
Our whole nation is indeed indebted to Justice Scalia for his lifetime of noble and truly incredible service.
So that's the tradition that he started. So the two sides would be, Republicans would say, look, you don't have a country if you don't allow us to deport these illegals. With Biden allowing 11 million illegals in. And Roberts would have to say, look, I have to be blind to the repercussions of this. Just because you want to get rid of illegals doesn't mean I have to weigh on one side or the other of this Constitution. It either says you have birthright citizenship or it doesn't.
You said you're an originalist. Is that true? What does that mean in English?
So in English, that means that I interpret the Constitution as a law, that I interpret its text as text, and I understand it to have the meaning that it had at the time people ratified it. Okay. So that meaning doesn't change over time, and it's not up to me to update it or infuse my own policy views into it.
So in other words, you're bound by the people who wrote it at the time they wrote it. That keeps you from substituting your judgment for theirs. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And they're trying to go back to the intent of the writer. When the writer was writing, when they put together the Constitution, did they intend to allow 11 million illegals to come in by one administration illegally? Or did they intend to protect Irish people that were here working and have them having babies, or English people who came over and had babies? What is it to be an American citizen? And Democrats want to go back, and they don't want deportations of broken up families. So they're trying to get Roberts to weigh another way. And he goes, nope, I have to keep my blinders on. Both sides. That's my explanation for it. Here we go. It's hard to overstate the importance of this case. It stands to determine whether federal judges can issue court orders that block presidential policies across the entire country. These are lower judges like Boasberg, radical Democrat judges. The use of these nationwide injunctions has figured prominently in the legal pushback against Trump's most controversial actions since the start of his second term. If a majority of Supreme Court justices adopt the government's position in its entirety, then the injunctions would be narrowed to apply to just the 7 expectant parents who are parties to the case. Those are the illegals who have kids. The Trump administration might then be able to effectively end birthright citizenship throughout the rest of the country unless and until the Supreme Court weighs in on the underlying legal merits of the president's executive order itself, which have been roundly rejected by every court that has considered the matter. They didn't write, mostly appointed by Democrats, and by virtually every credible scholar, again, Democrats, and independent legal analysis, Democrats, at a later date. Should these practical consequences matter to all of the justice? It's not clear that they will, or even should, at least according to Supreme Court Justice Chief Justice John Roberts. So we just heard from him this week in an interview. Roberts sat down for a rare fireside chat in New York this week, and although most of the coverage homed in on Roberts' assertion of judicial independence, the more significant exchange occurred when the interviewer asked Roberts whether he considers the, quote, real-life practical consequences, that is, the effects, the real-life practical consequences of his rulings when rendering decisions. So, guys, this is the whole key moment of the whole article right here. Roberts rejected the notion. Quote, if you do that, unquote, he said, you're kind of putting yourself in the place of the legislature. That reveals everything about the political theory of the right and conservative constitutionalism versus the left or progressive that has been attacking the Constitution for 100 years. We could use Roe v. Wade as an example. You know, the Democrats wanted to make abortion legal and constitutional and give a woman a constitutional right. So then they go into the Constitution and go looking for a right to privacy that even Ruth Bader Ginsburg said was poorly decided, because they go, look, that's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution does not say you have a right to an abortion.
The problem is that the other approach is enormously seductive. Even for the average citizen, it's seductive to think that the Constitution means what it ought to mean. It's a living Constitution. Anything I care passionately about, it's right there in the Constitution. You know, people used to say when they don't like something that's going on, they say, there ought to be a law. There used to be a comic strip that you know, there ought to be a law about people playing boom boxes in the park and stuff like that. People don't say that anymore. They say, it's unconstitutional, if they really feel passionately about it. And it is even more seductive to judges. It's a wonderful thing to have a constitutional case, and you're always happy with the result, because it means exactly what you think it ought to mean.
That shows you what I mean by Roberts is saying he's not going to put himself in the place of the legislature and shut Trump down just because he wants to end Trump's deportation of potential American citizens. That's not what Roberts is allowed to do. He also isn't allowed to consider Trump's thing of going like, look, you don't have a country if you allow this invasion. Roberts is not allowed to say in his mind, well, we are being invaded by 11 million people, and therefore I will decide this on the Constitution. See what I mean? It's a very different way of looking at principle, or the proper means versus ends versus means, just ends versus just means.
You were confirmed 98 to zip. Those days are over, aren't they?
I think they are over, but once they have figured out that the Supreme Court is essentially rewriting the Constitution, term by term, the old criteria for appointing and confirming judges no longer apply. I mean, it's what kind of a new Constitution will this person write? Will he put in the things that I like and take out the things I don't like? And that's what's been going on in recent confirmation processes, at least where the Senate is not overwhelmingly in the control, the filibuster-proof control of one party. Judge so-and-so, do you think there's a right to, whatever it is, abortion, whatever you hate or love? You don't? Well, I think it's there, and my constituents think it's there, and I'm not going to put you on the Supreme Court. That's what's going on.
Democrats want to look at ends and reverse engineer a reason for it. The Chief Justice argued that you could, for instance, look at the court's Second Amendment jurisprudence and say that the consequences include more people having more guns. Or, he said, you can say the consequence is that more people are armed and therefore they're in a better position if there's a foreign invasion, as there was with the British shortly after the Second Amendment. So see, those are two different outcomes. Democrats say, but more guns are getting in the hands of more people, and there's more gun accidents with children. The Supreme Court is not allowed to consider that. And then the Republicans would say, but if there's a foreign invasion, all the people are already armed. And he's just going, that's, that probably does align more with what the founders meant with the Second Amendment right. In pushing back, Roberts offered a fairly standard exposition of textualism and originalism, the prevailing mode of constitutional and statutory interpretation under the current 6-3 conservative supermajority of justices. Of course, many judges, lawyers, scholars, and liberal Supreme Court justices reject these approaches, preferring, for instance, to utilize a broader array of interpretive tools. That's a nice way of saying the ends justify the means. To utilize a broader array of interpretive tools when deciding cases, including text, historical and legal context, legislative history, and yes, the real life practical consequences of judicial rulings. I'll translate that. It means they believe in using fashion, trends, culture, preferences, their own opinion, their own wishes, Marxism, a desire for utopia. Those are all things that the left believes is what you use to interpret the Constitution.
Much of the harm that has been done in recent years by activist constitutional interpretation is made possible by a theory which says that unlike an ordinary law, which doesn't change, it means what it meant when it was enacted, and will always mean that. Unlike that, the Constitution changes from decade to decade to comport with, and this is a phrase we use in our Eighth Amendment jurisprudence, the court does, to comport with, quote, the evolving standards of decency that mark the progress of a maturing society. In other words, we have a morphing Constitution. And of course, it's up to the court to decide when it morphs and how it morphs. That's generally paraded as the, quote, living Constitution. And unfortunately, that philosophy has made enormous headway, not only with lawyers and judges, but even with John Q. Public.
The ruling in next week's case alone could change the lives of thousands of children that will be born in this country, and that's none of John Roberts' business. To both undocumented and temporary illegal immigrants, between now and whenever the Supreme Court issues a final ruling on the merits on the order, those children could be born stateless in the meantime and exposed to deportation proceedings. The Supreme Court's oral argument will no doubt be closely watched by legal and political observers across the spectrum, and this barely literate comic book artist. When I bring it to you, we will be watching this all this week, gang. If this ends up being one of the cases in which Roberts and his conservative colleagues opt to ignore the, quote, real-life practical consequences, unquote, of their ruling, it could bode poorly for the other challenges to Trump's aggressive and unprecedented assertion of executive power. So this is another one where you don't want the Supreme Court going against executive power. Politico and the Democrats do. They're trying to undermine Trump's entire next 4 years, gang. That's what this is really about. This is the tip of the spear. Pray for Trump. Pray for a win. Pray that Justice Roberts just looks at the text and does not consider the real life consequences and then reverse engineer that in reading into the Constitution. That's not what a judge is for. Roberts knows it. I'm Doug in Exile. Subscribe if you want more political commentary on the Supreme Court. Let's go.
Many people in Washington and around the country are surprised at the civility that exists between justices, even though they write not such favorable things about each other. So, for example, Justice Scalia used to say not such wonderful things about your views, and you then still went to the opera with him. Was that a little awkward or hard to do?
and not at all. And what did I love most about him? His infectious sense of humor.